For a libertarian, do you think Trump has been a disaster? Because I can see arguments that make some sense libertarian-wise in terms of some of the state stuff and some of the taxes stuff that kind of makes sense on a traditional libertarian or even conservative side, and then some of the bigger government things that don't make sense.
I think Jeff Sessions is the worst presidential appointment of my lifetime.
Wow.
He's a disaster. And that alone, the sort of the no states' rights, no Fourth Amendment, Jeff Sessions is terrible. I have some friends, including Walter Block at Loyola University in New Orleans, who is hoping that Trump will be something good on foreign policy. Mm-hmm. I think you can make that argument. I think Trump's inability even to consider rule of law and the constitutional restrictions on the presidency, it make even worse the slide that we've been in for an expansion of an imperial presidency. So I worry that all of those bonds are now going to be broken, and we're going to look for the big man, the Messiah, and we're just going to trade back and forth between different visions of that, and that can never work.
Yeah, and that goes exactly to where we started this conversation about looking for that Messiah. Do you think that our institutions are actually strong enough? I mean, I'm a believer that these institutions still have enough power that if Trump was to do something truly illegal or truly overstepping executive authority, that even though the Republicans control Congress, that we still have enough juice left in the system to take care of that. So that, I think, would sort of mitigate some of my fears about him, for sure.
Absolutely. The system is pretty strong in a way. So James Madison in Federalist 51 said that the structure of the government should be such that ambition is made to counteract ambition. So you can be a Republican member of the Senate, but you look in the mirror, you see a god. Man, I am a badass. And
right.
I have the power of the Senate. Here the president is trying to use executive orders. I don't like that much because it makes me less powerful as a senator. And so a number of people in the Senate, I think, will use Madison's ambition must be made to counteract ambition insight to limit Trump at some point.
Yeah. So as a guy that I can tell, obviously, you're not a big Trump fan, but you still trust in the system. What do you make of when you hear someone like Maxine Waters constantly saying, we're going to figure out a way to impeach him? You know, like, we don't know what it is yet, but we're going to get there. That, to me, that is almost more undermining of the system than the excesses that Trump may or may not have, or may not be doing at the moment.
I agree with everything you said except almost.
Oh, all right.
It is more undermining of the system. So we don't have a parliamentary system where a vote of no confidence is enough. It takes high crimes and misdemeanors. And I was actually proud of the American system in 1998, where for no good reason, Bill Clinton, there's a lot of problems with Bill Clinton, but he was impeached and the Senate said, this is stupid. Well, I think that would happen again. The Democrats were very upset when there was a movement among Republicans to say we should impeach Barack Obama. So I think this may just be background, and the nice way to interpret it is it's a way for Democrats to raise money from their base. They don't actually mean it, but it's just red meat out there.
Yeah. Right, which is also pretty horrible.
Okay, but just saying it means that you're undermining the rule of law. You're actually doing what you say you're upset at Trump for doing.
Yeah, so is there anyone in politics right now that you look at and you go, this guy's basically on board with the principles that I believe in?
I mean, it won't surprise you to learn that I admire Rand Paul.
Yeah.
And I actually liked Gary Johnson. I thought...
Really?
Yeah,
So
sure.
All right, let's talk about him for a little bit. Let's just talk about him within the framework of libertarian politics. I've had him on the show. I spent time with him about a half hour before we were on air. I think he is a totally lovely guy, really. And I enjoyed talking to him, and I could see us being friends, actually. But the candidacy was pretty terrible.
It was the greatest ever. It was 3 times as much as we've ever gotten before. We got 3%. That's amazing. That's enough for ballot access in many states.
But do you think that might have just been a function of disgust with the other two? That Gary himself, that unfortunately he just seemed ill-equipped to be up there and have enough of a command of the issues. Well, and by the way, I say that with total sympathy for him because there was nothing he could do to get in the news except flub. They would only talk about him when he flubbed. So he was in an unwinnable position.
He is so much better than anything else that we have had. And I mean, I'm actually a Libertarian partisan. I ran for governor of North Carolina in 2008. I did not win.
Yeah. We're going to get to that.
Well, I campaigned with Gary Johnson. I got to know him pretty well. Yes, he flubbed. He was tired. He made a bunch of mistakes, and that's what the media emphasized. It was really important that he got 3%. And in fact, if you were to look, suppose you strip away the party labels and you're a visitor from Mars.
Yeah.
Well, there's this person who has been Secretary of State and has experience as a senator. And then there's these two people who were multi-term governors of pretty mixed states. And then some psycho person in real estate. You don't think, all right, those are the Libertarian candidates. So my question would be compared to what? I thought Gary Johnson did a great job.
Yeah.
He did the best a Libertarian candidate has ever done, and he gave us something to build on. Did I cringe at the Aleppo incident? Of course.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. In August, I endorsed him basically with the idea of let's get the guy to 15%. So that at least for one debate, because we know the Democrats and Republicans control the debates, at least for one debate, because they'd never let him in a second one, but at least for one, let's hear some of these limited government ideas. And unfortunately, there just wasn't enough juice there. But you know what? I'm hearing you, and maybe I will ease off him a little bit.
Well, the question is compared to what?
Yeah.
He got 3%. The best we ever did was 1%.
All right, so then what does that mean to you is the future for the Libertarian Party? And do you think that a third party actually can, if that 3% means something to you, do you think that that means it could be 6% in 2020? Could it be really impactful in 2020?
Third parties in a system of first past the post, which is what we have, you're always going to have two main parties in a first past the post system. But the positions of the parties will depend partly on the pressure that's brought to bear. And if you have someone who can participate in debates, particularly at the state level, you can remind the two state-sponsored parties of the things that are in their platform that they're leaving out. So I don't think a third party is going to win, but what I care about is the policies, not the face. Remember, I care about rules and not the people.
Yeah.
So if the two state-sponsored parties are obliged by opening up to the scolding winds of competition, and they have better policies, that's what I hope that the third parties can do.
Yeah, I hear people on the right all the time say, well, if we back a Libertarian, what you end up doing is splitting the vote on the right, and then you help people on the left. How would you explain to somebody that that may not matter, and maybe that has to happen?
Well, you only get one vote. And sometimes people do advocate what political scientists call voting the LOTE, lesser of two evils. Well, if you vote for the lesser of two evils, you're certainly going to get an evil.
Right.
The only way to waste your vote is to vote for a candidate you don't actually want. And if you vote for a candidate that you do want, that's going to give a signal to the two state-sponsored parties that we don't find this to be acceptable. So all your votes are wasted. They don't determine the outcome. Now, what I get then is conservatives particularly saying, what if everyone thought that way? Ah, a Jedi you are. So your vote affects thousands of others? No.
Right.
You have one vote. You can choose to waste it, or you can vote what you actually believe and try to send a signal.
Yeah. Which I think would be more important than just throwing it away or going lesser two evil route.
I would think that. I think we've gotten stuck in this lesser of two evils as the two parties have gotten more and more evil.
Yeah. Do you think part of that also is that the whole system now, and when I say the system, I mean our political system and our media system, there's only a certain type of person who would run. And now we can talk a little bit also about your 2008 campaign, but that it would take, you know, the idea of having to deal with what your family will have to deal with. They're going to track down every email that you ever had, if you had an affair, or whatever it is, just all of that nonsense. You're only going to get a certain type of person that wants to do this, and that basically good, decent people will self-select out. I hear this all the time. Every time I see somebody or I talk to somebody that I think should be in politics, I wouldn't want to subject myself to that. But many guests here that privately I've said, you want to run for something? And everyone, no, never.
There's really two problems. One is the process of running is very difficult. It takes a lot of time, and you constantly have your motives questioned, and it's psychologically very difficult. The other problem is if you win, you have to serve. And a lot of people that are really good at things are really good at things. They're doing something else. So you have to be the sort of person who, that I don't want to say too much about Donald Trump, but who just thinks of yourself as being essentially infallible. And the problem is we as voters validate that. So I found often in debates and talking to people, voters would ask a question about some policy. And I say, well, that's actually really complicated. That's something experts disagree about. Here are the two arguments. And you can see their eyes glazing over. And my opponents would say, I know exactly the right thing to do, and here it is. And then they would say something stupid. But that wins.
But it wins.
I know what to do is always going to win over, this is hard.
Yeah, which is also a great argument for small government, to admit it every now and then, I don't know what to do.
Humility.
So maybe we shouldn't be, passing just things that are going to completely change the system, because the truth is nobody knows what comes out on the other side.
And the fact that something is a problem doesn't mean that there's a solution. So I call that the we should do something problem. X is a problem.
Right.
We should do something. Y is something. Therefore, we should do Y. It doesn't follow. The fact that something should be done, but then they'll say, well, you don't care about X. So unemployment and poverty are problems. And so there are these things that we should do.
Right.
And I said, well, those things won't work. Oh, you hate poor people.
Yeah. And it's almost impossible to extricate yourself out of that, right? So, all right, so you ran as the Libertarian candidate for governor of North Carolina in 2008. So first off, since I can tell you're a real politic person, why not just run as a Republican, which would have perhaps given you a better shot? Just start, in the reality of...
I live in North Carolina.
Yeah.
Our Democrats are Republicans. Our Republicans are Taliban. They want Sharia law. Now it's Christian Sharia law.
Right. So so this is the real Christian right.
I would have come in 8th in a 7-person primary if I had run as a Republican. So there really is no constituency in North Carolina among the Republicans for my view of conservatism.
But if the Democrats are Republicans, why not run as a Democrat then?
I considered running as a Democrat, but the Democrats have had a machine that controlled the state, and it was clear who the nominee was going to be. I also, the reason that I ran was my objection to North Carolina's ballot access laws. We have some of the most restrictive ballot access laws in the country. If Coke and Pepsi could decide how many soft drinks there should be, they would say 2. The Republicans and Democrats actually get to do that, and they think 2 is the right number.
Yeah.
So we had to raise about $300,000 to get on the ballot, and then we could never get enough votes to stay on the ballot. So 8 times we'd spent all this money, all this collection of signatures.
Yeah.
I figured that I could get 2%. It takes 2% to stay on the ballot. We'd never done that. So if you set your goals really low, you could be a success. I got more than 2%. So I figured I could do that, and I did. That was my objective, was to get the 2%, and I got 2.8%.
Do you think that some of those ideas that you were running on in 2008 have taken root in North Carolina?
They were at least mentioned by the other candidates, and sometimes the newspapers would even point this out. Also, I was in 4 televised debates, and in some ways I'm their worst nightmare. I have a PhD in economics, I'm a certain superficial glibness, and no chance of winning, so I could answer the questions.
Yeah, I haven't got the superficial glibness yet. Maybe it'll come, or maybe you're very effective at it, and I've missed it somehow.
Thank you.
What do you think is the reason that the Libertarians haven't done more at the state level? When people talk about the Libertarians, they go, well, Gary Johnson or whatever it is. And yes, there is Rand Paul, but technically he's a Republican.
Absolutely, totally.
There's Justin Amash. There's a couple people. But why haven't they done more just on the local level? This seems like a major opening for them.
Coming over here, I was promising myself I wasn't going to answer this question. But what the heck?
Go crazy.
I'll say. Here's what happens at Libertarian meetings. The first one, 20 or 30 people show up, and they're all enthusiastic.
Yeah.
And at the second meeting, 10 people show up. And the 10 say, I'm really glad those others didn't come back. They weren't real libertarians. Because what they're mainly concerned about is checking each other's papers. So you can tell if it's a real libertarian meeting by how long is it before there's an argument about whether individuals should be able to own nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
Nobody cares about that. When I was running for governor, people would say, would you end the Fed?
Yeah.
I'm running for governor, actually. This is not a state. Yeah, but I want to know. So what we really care about is ideological purity, because if you cared about actual policy or winning, you would suck it up and be a Democrat or Republican.
Right.
So the problem that we have as libertarians is that I don't think people conceive themselves as being part of a political process. They think of themselves as outre, as being outside and truth tellers, the keepers of a last flickering remnant of truth.
Yeah.
And that's just not a very effective political strategy.
That's interesting, because to me, after doing this show for about 2 years and having, you know, a lot of classical liberals on, a lot of libertarians, and I've had progressives and conservatives and everything, that to me, basically the difference that I see between classical liberals and libertarians is a little more realistic utility for the state. So when someone comes in with that question and says to you, well, you're going to get rid of the Fed, and you go, I'm running for governor, and also that's a really high-level philosophical thing that we, you know, that to me, it's just a more realistic approach to how to change things. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Yes, and I've made a distinction in a couple of things that I've written between directional and destinationist libertarians. Destinationist libertarians have a particular libertopia in mind, and anything that's not like that is out. Directionalists would want to say, are there policies that we could choose that would be cheaper, lower deficits, lower the power of the state, and increase personal responsibility and liberty? So an example would be, when I was running for governor, my educational platform was vouchers. And a lot of people means-tested vouchers. So the poorest 40% would get more school choice. Many of the wealthy have it now. Let's have more school choice for the very poor. And a lot of people on the left were kind of interested in that. There's a lot of African American citizens that are just desperate to get their children into better schools. Libertarians, almost without exception, said, oh no, the state would be involved in that. The only acceptable libertarian policy is the immediate elimination of all taxes.
Right. Again, this is the part that is not the realistic part.
Because they're destinationists.
Yeah.
So the destinationists are always going to be there. Libertarians, if they're going to have any success, are going to have to appeal to the directionalists in both parties that say, look, the government has too many powers. We may disagree about how far back we want to move it, but let's move the train in the other direction. We're going the wrong way. So I think there's a consensus we should move it back. Where we get off the train, that's a different question.
Yeah.
But let's change the direction.
What would you say is the easiest way to explain state power, when I mean state, I mean local or federal, to the person that doesn't quite get this, to the person that when you talk about government power and government overreach, they just think it's like you're talking about some sort of ephemeral thing that doesn't really exist. What do you think the best argument to get them to start understanding the ideas of what liberty really is?
Well, this is obviously something I've thought about a lot, and I haven't really succeeded. So you're asking what the best argument it is, but it's very frustrating because people have a conception of a thing called a state. So something I've written a lot about is the unicorn conception of the state. So imagine that I have a mass transit proposal, and what we'll have is these large carts that are pulled by unicorns. And unicorns are great for mass transit because they eat rainbows. They're very strong, and their flatulence smells like fresh strawberries. So there's no emissions problem.
I did not know that part.
There's no emissions problem. That's really great. Now you could object, well, I think there's a problem with this actually because unicorns don't really exist. Close your eyes. You see one.
Yeah.
So do I. They totally exist in the sense that I can imagine them. That's how people think of the state. When I say, look, the state is messing up. Well, right, because we have bad people. All we need to do is get the right people,
better people,
because
right.
I can imagine a state that's doing these things. It's very difficult to fight that. So the argument that I try to make, having given that caveat, that it's hard to fight unicorns, because that's what people want, is something they can imagine, not something that exists. But the argument that I actually try to make is that every flaw in consumers, and there are many, is worse in voters. So you think consumers are too stupid to be able to choose what size Coke to buy or which car to buy. Voters have all those problems and more. So my colleague, Dan Ariely at Duke, who writes about rationality and consumer problems and wants the state to intervene, there's no such thing as the state. There's just people. If we're going to have voters choose what these experts are going to make people do, it'll be even worse than the market.
Right. So it's like, so basically we are the flaw in the system in a really perverse way.
Which means that the best system is one that recognizes that and doesn't try to do too much.
Yeah.
Because if we give voters enough power, they'll do what they did in the South and afflict minorities. They'll say no same-sex marriage. There's no reason to think that if you take one person who's too stupid to make his own choices at the grocery store and put them together into an angry mob,
right.
they can then choose a good president or a good Food and Drug Administration.